Support comes from Empower Missouri, working to fight poverty and secure basic human needs and equal justice through coalition building and advocacy. Information about involvement at empowermissouri.org/action.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is Politically Speaking. George Hruza faltered in his first effort to get to the Missouri General Assembly. But the St. Louis County Republican is now in the Missouri House, where he's become one of the key lawmakers involved with health care and tax policy. Hruza joins us next on Politically Speaking to talk about what he expects the legislature to do in the last few weeks of session, and whether Republicans will be successful in placing an anti-Amendment 3 measure on the 2026 ballot. Let's hit the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, the definitive show about Missouri politics.
Let's go back to some of those policies, to that peace and prosperity that we had some 4 to 5 years ago.
Everywhere is Democrat country once this Democrat's been there.
There are a lot of things in Washington that are very bipartisan, including some bills that I've already gotten passed.
And I think it works best when you can see both sides, but you have to pick one, and I firmly align with the Republicans.
But certainly, I think if she's running against one of the crazy dudes, certainly it's going to be a lot easier.
But I'll take wisdom in age and a few missteps in oral over somebody who has no substance.
I believe that you represent the party's values and you move forward, and that's what I have done.
And welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, St. Louis Public Radio political correspondent Jason Rosenbaum. Joining me from beautiful and scenic mid-Missouri, we have St. Louis Public Radio State House and politics reporter
Sarah Kellogg.
And joining us in studio for the second time, but the first time as an actual elected official, he represents Missouri's 89th House District.
Yes, George Hruza. 89th District is Frontenac, Town and Country de Pere, Eastern Chesterfield, and unincorporated St. Louis County.
You got my first question out of the way, so welcome. It's almost like you've been on the show before. You had run for the state senate in 2022 and were not successful. You lost to State Senator Tracy McCreary, but you managed to bounce back last year and succeed former House Speaker Dean Plocher. What made you want to give state politics another go?
Well, I found the experience, even though we weren't successful, I have to say exhilarating. I found out so much about what the voters in the district, what's important to them, and I feel that I can make a difference at in the capital to benefit my constituents as well as all of Missouri. And I felt losing isn't fun, I can tell you that. But then after about a week or two, Carrie and I kind of picked ourselves up off the ground and said, we can contribute, and I was successful, and I can tell you I'm really, really excited about being there because it truly is an opportunity to make a difference.
What have been your initial impressions of the Missouri House, which is, I'm sure as you know, is substantially different than from the Senate?
Well, it certainly is. I kind of feel in hindsight that I'm probably happier being in the House based on what I see going on in the Senate, because in the House it seems to be a much more of a cooperative type of environment where people really listen to each other and work on improving legislation. It's to me that's been a very good thing, and also everybody seems to be mostly helpful to each other to make things better.
I guess kind of impressions of the House from kind of outside looking in as a reporter is that actually that's a really Republican-run chamber, whereas the Senate really forces cooperation between Democrats and Republicans. Do you disagree with that notion? I guess kind of the of working together, because to me it really feels like it's one party ruling, whereas in the Senate there's at least a little bit more cooperation.
Certainly there is a fair amount of that, but as a physician, I'm on all the healthcare related committees, and I have several bills that are bipartisan. I've actually added bills to my bills, as you kind of know, make these amendments to bills as they move through the process, and I one bill that I was able to, my anti-Semitism bill, I added to it the
Crown Act.
Crown Act. Thank you. Yeah, the Crown Act.
I read your bill,
so that we could really be, and that makes it a bipartisan bill. We have another healthcare bill that I have with Representative Smith, a Democrat. Have a joint bill with him as well. So I find that we can do that. Obviously, on some of those politically charged issues, the House will tend to be Republican. But I think about half the bills that we've voted out of the House have had bipartisan support. A number of them have actually been unanimous. So I think we do have room where we can work together.
As you said, you are a physician by trade. How has that helped you navigate the policymaking realm in a different way than someone who is not a physician?
Well, it's helped and hurt, I have to say. Because as a physician, we kind of look at things somewhat black and white. It's straight. There's one answer. This is what you do for the patient. And you don't deviate from that. And in the legislature, there's a lot of situations where you've got to be willing to make some compromise and say, well, I think this is important, but maybe we can make some change. However, I think it has been helpful I feel that I'm able to, certainly in the healthcare area, see the unintended consequences of legislation. Because there's a lot of legislation that comes up and really good idea, want to make a difference. But then as you think through the process, if this becomes law, what are going to be the downstream effects? And I find a lot of bills have those, and being able to, for me, being able to actually share that perspective often has helped in maybe making changes in the legislation to make it do what you want it to do without causing those unintended consequences.
One of the bills that I think you sponsored early on involves the capital gains tax in Missouri, which I think has morphed into like a really large bill that came out of the Senate. Can you talk about why you decided to take that issue on and where it is in the process?
Well, I'm being a free market, small government Republican, I feel that the capital gains tax elimination in Missouri would really significantly improve our competitiveness with surrounding states, where we've got states around us that have either zero capital gains tax, state tax, or significantly lower than what we have. A capital gains tax operates as a friction in the system because people are loath to sell appreciated property to redeploy the capital in other more productive uses because they don't want to pay the tax. So that is, to me, it's the most efficient way to get our economy moving, to get businesses to invest, reinvest, moving from out of state, and hire more people to employ more Missourians. And it certainly gives us a competitive boost with our surrounding states that we're competing with constantly, especially Tennessee.
Before we go to the next question, or the next section, what is currently the percentage that somebody has to pay on capital gains in Missouri?
So in Missouri, the state capital gains tax is 4.7%.
And you want to bring it down to zero?
Correct.
Okay. Do you know how much that's going to cost the state overall?
Yes. So the what I call the static fiscal note on it was $230 million. Mm-hmm. I do have to say though that if you were to do that dynamic scoring, it would be a lot less because the intent is to have increased growth with more employment, more investment. That is the key aspect of it. If you look at capital gains taxes when they were cut nationally, what happened is in the year after, the capital gains tax collections more than doubled, which to me suggests that lots of capital was tied up in unproductive uses, and people cashed those in and hopefully redeployed in more productive uses. So I think it's very beneficial. The other problem with capital gains taxes is the fact that it really taxes what I would call phantom income, because most capital gains end up being inflation inflation generated. So your assets increase over time, but inflation, of course, erodes that value. So you're paying tax on income that wasn't there. And the last thing would be that the one example is that we have a large agriculture community in Missouri, and it's a real challenge in transferring the property from one generation to the next because of the taxes get in the way. So it interferes with efficient functioning of that community as well.
You introduced legislation that would integrate the International Holocaust Remembrances Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism into state law and require that schools incorporate it into all of their codes of conduct. Can you explain why you sponsored this bill, first of all?
Sure. I grew up in communist Czechoslovakia. My mother's a Holocaust survivor. And when I grew up, we suppressed our Jewish identity. And I wouldn't even know that I was Jewish, actually, when I was growing up. And she herself suffered from nightmares about being back at the camp, at the concentration camp, Mauthausen. And that continued until we came to the United States. When we came to the United States, her nightmares went away, and she started openly embracing her Jewish heritage and speaking about her experience. That's because where I grew up, she did not feel safe. Came to the United States, she felt safe, we felt safe being Jewish. And I felt that way all through until October 7th happened. And after October 7th, with its murder, rape, torture, hostage-taking, instead of seeing an outpouring of sympathy and support, there was within hours an outpouring of hatred and anti-Semitic behaviors. And then we saw in colleges around the country what happened after that, which was not just protests, but actually anti-Semitic behavior, harassment, assault, intimidation of Jewish students. So my bill is all about Jewish student safety on campus, both K through 12 and colleges, so that they can pursue their studies and have the same opportunity that I had, that they can focus on their life and their future, living the American dream, not worrying about being Jewish and somehow being ostracized for that. And I will tell you, the bill specifically deals with Jewish anti-Semitic behavior. So it does not say you cannot have anti-Semitic speech, which is very carefully defined in the IHRA definition. So if you're out there on the street protesting and calling, about genocide in Gaza or calling out from the river to the sea and so forth, that is protected in that bill. It's very explicitly states that. What the bill really deals with is the behavior. If you have a student that is trying to, walk to the library at school, and he stopped and checked at a checkpoint by some other students who say, are you Jewish? He says, yes, I'm Jewish. They say, well, Jews are not allowed here. You're not allowed to come through here. That is what we're trying to deal with. Another would be if you're in a classroom and the professor is teaching about what's happening in Gaza and maybe saying, Israel is doing some terrible things there. That's totally protected. However, if there are Jewish students in the classroom and the professor points to the Jewish student and say, you are responsible for the death of all of these Palestinians in Israel, that is when it becomes a problem. You're responsible, maybe even tell him to leave the class because we don't need you here. That is what we're trying to deal with. Intimidation, direct intimidation of Jewish students, and there's that harassment and engendering fear. When we had the testimony, it was a great example of that. When we had the testimony, a public hearing, a sophomore from Parkway West High School spoke about her experience at the school, about the anti-Semitic behavior that she encountered. And when she completed her testimony, She came out and she was sitting behind us, and she said, "I have to get out of here. I don't feel safe," to her mother. And they left. And what happened was that in the first row, right behind her, there were people opposed to the bill who were whispering all kinds of hateful things to her as she was giving her testimony. That is what we have. That is what the issue is. After the testimony, we were at the when we were leaving, everybody had pretty much left, and my wife and I were there, and we were surrounded by some of those opponents, and then they were verbally assaulting us, basically, and doing all kinds of, unpleasant verbally. And I said, politically, I'm fine. I'm a politician. The people can do that to me, but my wife didn't sign up for that. Ultimately, the Capitol Police had to escort us away from the group, and they escorted the group out of the building because they were quite rambunctious.
From a functional standpoint, how exactly would this bill work? If someone is found to be running afoul of any part of the definition of anti-Semitism, what would happen to them?
So again, it wouldn't be running afoul of the definition of anti-Semitism. It would be if they engage in behavior that is intimidating and causing fear in those Jewish students. The schools are supposed to have policies in place as to how to handle it, which would be disciplining the students. So they should investigate the incident if there's a complaint filed by students. They investigate the incident, determine if there was a violation of their policy, and if there is, then they would take disciplinary action. The next part of this is that if there was not a satisfactory resolution, then it would possibly then be reported to the Title VI coordinator at the state level, who then will look at not the incident itself, but into whether the schools really followed their policies, to see if the school violated Title VI protections.
So when I was reading St. Louis Public Radio reporter Evie Lewis's article about debate on this bill, State Representative Bridget Walsh Moore asked you if comparing or saying that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, would that run afoul of the bill? And you said it would. Was that misinterpreted, basically?
I said actually that it would be anti-Semitic speech, based on the definition, but it would not run afoul of the bill because it would be as long as it was just speech. So I said it would be the behavior, and I kind of gave you that example earlier today. It's that if you go after a Jewish student and blame them for the genocide in Gaza, as opposed to just saying Israel is committing genocide in Gaza.
Right, because like South Africa has submitted a case to the International Criminal Court, and you could say that it was wrong to do that, or they're wrong, but like expressing an opinion that you think that it was right to do that, I don't think would warrant. I would think would be protected speech. Totally.
Correct. And the bill very explicitly states that First Amendment speech protections are in place. It also has a very declarative statement about anti-discrimination against any of the protected classes, including Jews.
Benjamin Netanyahu has been very controversial within Israel for many years, even among Israelis. And I think criticizing his government's military reaction October 7th is not only like common here, it's common in Israel. So you mentioned like 600 times this is about behavior, not speech. But where do you think it crosses the line between legitimate criticism of a government and anti-Semitism?
It's when you blame American Jews in the U.S. of the actions of the Israeli government. That's when it becomes anti-Semitic. So you're basically blaming people who have absolutely nothing to do with it except that they are Jewish, blaming them for something that the Israeli government does. The example I used, even though that's a little different because it is actually legitimate in my mind, but it's criticizing China for the way they treat the Uyghurs.
Or saying Russia's committing genocide against Ukrainians. I think the reason I'm a little skittish about this is what happens if there's a movement to say, like, there's some anti-Russian, like, prohibition on behavior or something like that. Like, it's a slippery slope argument that maybe you've heard.
But I would tell you that if you have if you're a Russian here in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
if you're a Russian who's here in the United States, and you would have Ukrainians come after the Russian and says, you know, we don't want you here. We don't want you here because you are killing all of my, doing genocide in Ukraine, telling it to the Russian who is here, who's got absolutely nothing to do with what's happening there. That is what I'm trying to distinguish.
That's very fair, because if somebody came from Russia and came from here, they may have been leaving Russia because of political persecution, or maybe not, but maybe they have a completely different opinion on what's going on. So I appreciate that clarification as somebody who is both half Polish and half Ukrainian. We'll be right back with State Representative George Hruza on Politically Speaking. And we're back on Politically Speaking with George Hruza. He is a Republican from St. Louis County. And Sarah, I think that we want to shift gears to what has caught a lot of people's attention, and that is a measure aimed at counteracting Amendment 3, which placed abortion rights protections in the Missouri Constitution. I'll let you have the first question on this.
Absolutely. So, Representative, you ended up voting for a resolution last week that, with voter approval, would repeal Amendment 3 and replace it with a near total ban on the procedure. There are some exceptions for instances of rape, incest, fetal abnormalities, and medical emergencies, though. To be clear, with instances of rape and incest, the 12-week limit is what would be allowed for an abortion. Why did you support this amendment?
Well, my concern with Amendment 3 was that it really went way beyond abortion and including all the reproductive health care, which means regular pregnancy, IVF, vasectomy, oophorectomy, hysterectomy, and so forth, cesarean section. And the problem I had is that it took away rights from women to sue if something goes wrong with an abortion or any of those other procedures. It eliminated really the need for an obstetrician to be providing all those services. It says any healthcare professional can provide all of those services. It eliminated health and safety regulations for facilities that provide all of those reproductive healthcare services. So to me, and then also it eliminated parental consent. Currently, you need parental consent to give aspirin to a child at school, and here we're saying that a girl can have surgery without parental consent, and I just felt that is those were really my big issues with Amendment 3, and the resolution that we voted for corrects those deficiencies.
I'm curious. Do you know how your district voted on Amendment 3?
I believe it was in favor of Amendment 3.
So I guess my question is, the Speaker of the House, John Patterson, was the lone no vote last week on third read, so basically getting out of the chamber, and he cited his district, saying that it was an easy no for him because he felt like it was something that like a total repeal, which is more or less what this is with limited exceptions, that his district would not support that. Why are you not going the way that your district voted for?
Well, the challenge is that the language that the voters did see was the 50 words in the 50 words on the ballot, which most voters saw, and it did not include those concerns that I have expressed. So I believe that those concerns is why I felt, as a physician, I'm not comfortable giving unlimited immunity to individuals, and also as far as for doing surgeries, and also allowing individuals who are not qualified to perform surgeries on women. So to me, that was what made me feel my conscience. I could not go along with those aspects.
An argument that some Republicans have said on the reasoning for going through with an amendment that would overturn Amendment 3 was that voters didn't know what they were voting for, that they were fooled. Do you believe that your voters were fooled, and if so, how?
I do not believe voters were fooled. I do think that the amount of information that they were provided maybe was limited, but no, I mean I think voters are very smart. My district is the highest college level educated group in the state, so I believe they did read it, and they weighed the pros and cons, and where they settled. I'm just sometimes I've got to vote my conscience, and I just feel that protecting women and girls is really essential.
Proponents of Amendment 3 would actually say the opponents were actually the one engaging in a misleading campaign because they emphasized their belief that Amendment 3 would legalize gender transition surgery for minors, even though that's not explicitly mentioned in the amendment and is based off a disputed interpretation of the measure's language. What would you say that it was actually the opponents who were running the deceptive campaign and not the proponents?
I actually believe that both sides tend to exaggerate the pros and cons of any amendment, and in fact, it is the example you just mentioned. The courts haven't ruled on that yet, but there is already some posts of the proponents of Amendment 3 stating that actually it does include gender transitioning surgery. Now that's not
which is not legally binding. Like I could make this. I could say out loud that I think that gender transition surgery is reproductive health care. That does not mean that a court is going to agree with that. Basically,
I'm with you on that. I agree. No court has determined that. There are some other aspects of it that the court has already dealt with. For example, the health and safety aspects, which they have declared that the health and safety aspects of our regulations are not enforceable in the state, and that we were told by the other group that would not be a problem. So I think the challenge is that Amendment 3 language is so vague that it will probably take years to sort out what the actual, what the impact will be on all of those issues.
I don't disagree with that point. That is one place where we are in agreement here. But I want to stick on that issue about gender-affirming care for minors. That is a provision in this amendment. Why is it a provision when it's already banned in statute?
Well, I think that is probably because it was put in because the concern was that the courts will determine that is reproductive health care. Mm-hmm. Because when you do the gender reassignment surgeries, that does affect your fertility, and so that could be construed as being reproductive health care.
Not all gender transition surgery affects reproduction, though. If you get top surgery and not bottom surgery, you can still reproduce. You're
very correct. I don't disagree. I think that is a very valid point, and I think it is. As I said, it's put in there because of the uncertainty engendered.
Do you think it? Oh, sorry. Continue.
Engendered by the language in Amendment 3.
Do you think it was actually put in there because they wanted to make it a point on the ballot summary language, and they know that banning gender-affirming care for minors is popular, and it could be a way to pass this measure?
That that's only possible. I don't think of it that way. That's the part of me being a physician. I guess I don't try to read all kinds of stuff into legislation because I'm kind of somewhat of a black and white. I say, okay, well, that's what's written down there, so that's what we're aiming for.
I just want to read. I have the amendment language pulled up on my phone because we listed that on our story about it for this proposed amendment. And it says that shall the Missouri Constitution be amended to guarantee access to care for medical emergencies, ectopic pregnancies, and miscarriages, ensure women's safety during abortions, ensure parental consent for minors, allow abortions for medical emergencies, fetal anomalies, rape, and incest, require physicians to provide medically accurate information, and protect children from gender transition. So, what's not listed in that ballot summary is that it would empower lawmakers to ban abortions except in those instances. Why not include that information on the ballot summary?
Wait, I'm told that this is not actually a outright repeal. It's kind of a change to the Constitution. But maybe I didn't understand the question.
So I mean, I can just do a follow up. So like the ballot language, if you also read it, it strips out Amendment 3 pretty much. So it would be a repeal, and it replaces it with this new language. It does, keep the exceptions, but it is a ban on most abortions unless in those specific instances. And the fact that it would repeal most abortion access is not listed in the summary. So I guess my question is, why is that not in the summary when that is a big proponent of what this amendment does?
I think it's just, again, plain language. It says what it does. It says that's when when abortion is okay. Rape, incest, all those exceptions that you've mentioned. So I guess to me, it seems pretty plain language there.
Why doesn't it say that it would empower the legislature to ban abortions that are not based off those exceptions? Because it clearly will. And that's why it's being described as a near total abortion ban. Whereas now in Missouri, after Amendment 3, abortion is legal up to the point of fetal viability, which is defined very specifically in Amendment 3. And opponents say that that definition is very vague, as you kind of alluded to. Why isn't that a bullet point? Like, that seems like a more important bullet point than gender transition surgery being banned again.
Well, they got to fit it into 50 words, so they come up with the language that they need, just like the other amendment, for example, saying that it would that abortion actually is allowed up to term if it's the women's mental health is a problem, and women tend to have, with the hormonal effects, tend to have a lot of emotional changes during pregnancy, and so it doesn't. The original amendment didn't have that language. So there's both sides will certainly put in stuff that they believe is the most important, and the wording will be what they feel is, will certainly speak to what they feel are the key aspects.
So, believe it or not, Sarah, we are almost done with the 2025 legislative session. It has flown by.
Oh, 4 weeks, but who's counting, right?
4 weeks is less than 4 months. Besides the abortion amendment, which I expect is probably going to be a last week of session thing, what are some other big things you're expecting near the end of session?
Oh, for me?
Yes,
I'm
asking.
So sorry. I'm sorry. I thought you were asking Sarah.
No, I'm asking you.
So,
this is an interview with me, Representative.
Sorry,
this is all you.
I'm so sorry. I just.
You're good.
I think we'll keep this in. That was pretty funny.
Okay.
That was a very serious section. And I think it's a good way to lighten it up.
Well, I just want to mention we didn't talk about one aspect of the legislation which actually already did pass and passed into law, and there was a very extensive crime bill, House Bill 495, and I do want to stress that changed the control of the St. Louis City Police Department with the state commission, even though it does include the mayor in there as well, so the city will still have input, and it has a number of other components which hopefully will improve safety, including stronger issues dealing criminal penalties for fentanyl, sex trafficking, increasing the age to 14 from 12. The number of other aspects in terms of improved training of police officers to make sure that they don't do things like profiling and so forth. So that I thought was a really big legislation. I did co-sponsor that one. Going forward, as far as through the rest of the legislature, I have a number of healthcare-related issues that I've got on on the ballot, not ballot, but on the calendar that I'm trying to get through, dealing with things like minor seemingly things. For example, some insurance companies try to limit anesthesia time for surgeries, which we thought was absurd, and to put in legislation that they can't limit your anesthesia times. Another one is this thing called copay accumulators, which is a really patient-friendly legislation where if a patient has some very expensive medication, like a cancer patient that has cancer, that patient has someone else pays for their copay, which can be very large. And then some insurance companies decide that that does not count toward that patient's deductible.
Really? So, that is crazy.
Exactly.
Sorry about that. I was like, what?
Yeah.
Really?
And we're trying to get that legislation passed, and I don't know if hopefully we'll be successful, but it is, to me, it's double dipping by insurance companies, and the patient out of the blue says, okay, I've met my deductible, I'm good to go, and then they go to get an MRI or something to see how their cancer's done, and they get a $2,000 bill. They said, oh, no, it goes to your deductible. Sorry about that. So that is, to me, that's a big one. To me, I have a number of bills helping patients along those lines, and the number of safety measures such as AEDs in schools, bleed kits in schools, naloxone on ambulances. So I have a number of those kinds of things which I think we can really help patients. I do want to mention a couple of things. We have expanded access to, or expanding access to hearing aids and cochlear implants for Medicaid patients. Doula services is another one. So these are, I know they seem like minor things, but I think these are things that for those groups can make a significant impact.
This is something that comes to mind. Is the fact that the Speaker of the House is also a physician helpful to passing some of these things? Given, and this is going to get super, super inside baseball, but my understanding is there has always been some friction between physicians and physicians groups and insurance companies. So having a doctor as Speaker of the House probably tilts the balance towards physicians a little bit. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. It's been very helpful, actually, working with Speaker Patterson on a number of these, because, as you know, in the legislature, a lot of stuff depends on how quickly you can get bills to move through, and the Speaker has a lot of input on that. And I've been fortunate to get a lot of my things, these healthcare-related aspects, things moving them through. One other aspect that's significant to improve our healthcare workforce is there's this dental compact, so dentists and dental hygienists can come in from out of state and easily set up by getting reciprocity with other states, and lots of other professions, actually, speech therapists and any number of healthcare professions. So we are working hard. One other thing is I've been able to, hopefully if it makes it through the Senate, increase the funding for training residents in Missouri, paid for by Missouri, so that we can get more physicians to come and train in Missouri and stay in Missouri providing care.
Well, Representative, thank you for coming back on the show, and we hope to have you back in the future to talk about the continued domination of physicians over insurance companies in Missouri, which I'm sure insurance companies listening to this show are super thrilled about. Politically Speaking is a product of St. Louis Public Radio, which is a part of the University of Missouri St. Louis. You can read all of our coverage at stlpr.org. And Representative Hruza, are you on any social media platforms, or have you, like me, decided that they're all worthless and a waste of time?
Well, I am. I'm on, on Facebook, Hruza for Missouri, and LinkedIn is George.Hruza, and occasionally I go on X, but that's very rare. So it's LinkedIn and Facebook.
It's not worth going on to. Until next time, so long. Politically Speaking is produced by Sarah Kellogg, Rachel Lippman, and me, Jason Rosenbaum. The show is edited by Fred Ehrlich. Read all of our coverage at stlpr.org. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Politically Speaking by searching the term Politically Speaking on Apple Podcasts. from St. Louis Public Radio. This is Politically Speaking.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.